Without his golden arm, Vector was now free of Darkspeed's hold. He stood and prepared his lightning glove for an attack on Darkspeed. Darkspeed stood back and reached up behind his neck. The hood Darkspeed pulled over his head looked like a heavy mask. As his head was covered by the makeshift mask, it turned solid into his helmet. Vector knew that would be protection against his electrical attack. He instead turned and with one hand took hold of Cosmos' wrist. He spun him quickly and threw him at the villains that were tunneling down to Omni's lair. Darkspeed didn't hesitate to switch targets and catch his anchor. Once in his arms, he could see the hole through Cosmos' armor went in the stomach and out the back. Darkspeed turned and ran Cosmos to where the healers were waiting for wounded. How much longer? Darkspeed thought to Virtuoso. 0 to 6 minutes. We hear something on the ceiling, Virtuoso thought back. Let Prism run the machine. You teleport Cosmos down there and have him bubble the whole thing. He's with the healers. Got it! Darkspeed watched the enemy fighters get closer and dive in for an attack. From what Mr. Farakas said, he knew they had serious firepower. If those things were able to kill a hitter like Ajax, they must have some kind of powerful energy weapon. He looked over the battlefield and thought, how many were not strong enough to survive? Darkspeed moved quickly through the ranks looking for Shroud, Bob, and the others that might not make it. He spun his head as he heard explosions in the sky. Bishamon's sentinels had just attacked the fighters. The villain fighters were breaking off to engage the sentinels. Thank God! Darkspeed thought as he started looking for Vector again. Virtuoso had just teleported Cosmos into Omni's lair. The healer had done a good job with his wound. He was just a little shaken by the experience. In the lair, he took his helmet off and looked at the hole in his armor. No time for that! They're about to break through! Virtuoso pointed at the ceiling. Cosmos' eyes were instantly blue with energy as he placed a force bubble across the ceiling of the lair. The iron ceiling gave way and 3 villains jumped down only to land on the force bubble. Cosmos extended the bubble up the shaft at the speed of thought. The villains who were in the shaft found themselves shot out like bullets from a gun. Now to seal it, Cosmos said. The shaft was now full of solid super steel. The steel extended for miles from the surface all the way to the lair in one solid piece. Olympian and Eclipse moved close to the steel surface that was above Omni's lair. With some of the Alphas wounded and some simply carried to healers, the powerful hitters found themselves outnumbered. Olympian watched as the villains tried to surround the Alphas one at a time. Form a circle! Olympian cried out to the other hitters and anchors still fighting. Ranger and his team joined in, along with any Alphas left fighting. They ended up ringed in a circle around the flat steel circle. The horde of villains tried to penetrate the circle, but the Alphas held firm. Olympian shouted encouragements as he swung his chopper with force. She and Glimmer were still dealing with the assassin's threat. Both of the stealths had been wounded and regenerated at least twice. As invisible soldiers, they were able to move along the edges of the battle undetected. Darkspeed saw someone move at a speed only he could see. He started playing a deadly game of hide-and-seek with Vector. Stop! Move back! Bioforce jumped as she spoke. I felt him! Prism looked through the portal and into space that existed far before the Earth was ever formed. Are you sure? Yes, it was him. Go back! Prism moved the time display on the time portal forward until they saw the outline of a body. Prism sharpened and slowed the progression of time until it was a solid window into the past. Omni saw the open window and headed through it. Darkspeed was watching Vector closely as he tried to get close to him for an attack. Vector knew he was being stalked and was bringing Darkspeed in close. A fast beeping alarm startled Vector as it went off on his belt. Vector turned to Darkspeed, who was behind him, and said, Another time. With that, Vector reached to his belt and activated a control that made him disappear in a silvery flash. Darkspeed looked left and right to see if Vector was playing another game. Where did he go? Darkspeed thought. Omni now had both feet back in his lair. His eyes looked vacant and he shook his head in an attempt to feel normal. Were you in there long? Prism asked. Months, I think. What's going on? Omni asked. Alphas versus villains up top. Vector's leading them, Virtuoso said. Use your telepathy and tell the Alphas to separate themselves from the bad guys, Omni said as he looked up. What's that? They tried to tunnel in. I filled the shaft with super steel, Cosmos said. Make sure none of our guys are on it, Omni said to Virtuoso. Virtuoso thought for a moment and then said, All clear. Omni flew straight up at the super steel column. From the surface, it looked like the miles of long column launched like a missile into space. Omni flew through the shaft and spread his arms wide. His eyes radiated the electric blue energy so bright it was impossible to look at his face. Omni unleashed his matured Omni power on the villains surrounding his Alphas. Blue lightning that was many times faster and more powerful panned the areas the villains stood. In a fraction of a second, all but 2 were vaporized. In a flash, Omni was on these 2. With one hand on each villain's throat, he pinned them to the ground. "Where's Vector?" Omni demanded. Neither of the 2 could talk with their windpipes being crushed. Omni didn't let up with the pressure. He just kept demanding answers. Virtuoso teleported Cosmos, Bioforce, and Prism to the surface. "How do you contact him? How does he give you orders? Where is your fallback point? Where do you go for a healer?" "They can't talk," Darkspeed said. Omni let them go and stood over them. "You will not see the end of this day if I don't get some answers." "Comms are back up," Prism said. "Arthur wants to speak to you, Coach." Omni looked at his old student. "What does he want?" "Combat is global. They could use Omni's help." "Darkspeed, don't let them out of your sight." Omni flew back down the shaft to his lair. Cosmos followed him. "You found the lair?" Omni asked. "I had to, after Alpha was destroyed and we all retreated to London. It was the only way to get you back." Omni activated a portal on the far wall and started using his telekinesis on everything in the room. Cosmos watched as the contents of the room were swept through the portal. "Where are you putting your stuff?" Cosmos asked. "Backup layer, all but my black and gold." The case with Omni's black and gold armor slid over next to the 2 of them. Omni opened the glass case and took out his helmet. "Can I make it omnium?" "Sure," Omni said as he faced the helmet at Cosmos. Cosmos felt into the armor and turned all the steel into super steel, and then Omni put the armor on at high speed. Then both Omnis flew back to the surface. "Fill it all up," Omni said to Cosmos, and he did. Omni looked around as the healers finished up with the wounded. Eclipse and Orbit stood guard on the 2 villains. All the Alphas stared at Omni like he wasn't real or they were too starstruck to speak. Omni looked down at the helmet in his hands. He then walked closer to his team. "I'm still the same coach who trained you. You can still call me Connors," Omni said. "I don't think I could do that, Omni," Olympian said. Omni looked at the helmet in his hands one last time. "How many people know about this?" "Everyone, I think," Cosmos said. "So much for a secret identity." Omni dropped his helmet on the ground and turned to Darkspeed. "Round up everyone and get them back to London." Omni streaked into the sky toward London. Olympian dove and reached for the helmet before anyone else could even think about it. "Can I see it?" Ranger asked. "No way! This is the single biggest, best thing that will ever sit on my trophy wall," Olympian said as he clung to the helmet. Omni stopped and landed on top of the London HQ. He waited for the ceiling to open for him as it had done so many times in the past. Finally, he burst through the ceiling and into the upper hangar bay. From there, he flew quickly through the corridors of the HQ, finally stopping in the command center. Arthur and the others came to some semblance of attention as their old coach came into the room. This time he wasn't wearing his normal civilian clothes they were used to. He was wearing Omni's costume. "Stop gawking and talk," Omni said. We have 13 active combat sites right now. They're shown on the board," Arthur said as he pointed at a large map on the wall. "Here," Omni said as he handed a small device to Arthur. "It's a communicator that doesn't use your comm system. It just talks direct to me. Every time I say next, you give me the location of the next fight. Don't worry about how far apart they are. Just keep them coming. Where's sights first? Where am I going?" "Detroit," Arthur said. "Make me a faster way in and out," Omni said as he burst out the side of the building. Arthur and the others looked out to see if they could still see him. Arthur jumped when he heard the communicator in his hand go off. "Next 2, I said," Omni yelled over the communicator. "St. Petersburg and Prague," Arthur said. Arthur kept answering Omni's request until after the 8th city. Omni reported back that the site was clear. Arthur gave him the remaining sites, but the story was the same. The villains were gone. "I'm going to run a quick sweep. Let me know if you hear anything," Omni said. "What did he just do?" Miss Waldron asked Arthur. "That was so quick. I don't know what he could have done," Arthur answered. Miss Waldron soon found the answer as the other halls that were under attack started to call in. The superheroes described a flying superhero that flew through and vaporized the villains on the site. "They're all gone in Rio, too," Miss Waldron said as she turned off the last red light on the map. "I knew Omni was powerful, but wow," Arthur said. "The last 5 sites the villains left before Omni could arrive. That means they still have a comm system." Dr. DeClute walked into the command center and looked at the calm map and the surprised faces. "It's true. He's back, isn't he?" "Omni said he would do a sweep and then return here," Arthur said. "Darkspeed and his teams are returning. They're in the upper hangars. I suppose I'll have to congratulate him."